All right, we'll wait one more minute and see if anyone else comes.
Maybe they're making late Havdalah.
Maybe, although they'd be getting hungry by now. All right. Let's get started, and people join. They'll join as they come. So I'm gonna share my screen as usual with the sources. If you are listening or watching at some point in the future, and you would like a copy of the packet, please email me at deborahklapper@gmail.com. Okay, so we are already in part 8 of the 10th chapter of Pesachim, and we are just coming to almost the end of the material about Kiddush and Havdalah, and we will next week return to the topic of eating and drinking right before Yom Tov starts on Erev Pesach, and very soon after that we will actually get to Pesach itself. But for now we have this week and then a little bit of the beginning of next week, which is still devoted to the details of how one goes about making Kiddush and Havdalah. Okay. So we begin with a midrash. Tanu Rabbanan. Zachor Yom HaShabbat L'Kodsho, Zachrehu Al Hayayin. So we start by quoting the pasuk in Shemot. Remember the day of Shabbat to sanctify it. And the midrash says, remember means mention it over wine, or remember it over wine. And this is a pretty consistent pattern in rabbinic reading of the Torah, that any time that there's a mitzvah to remember something, it is interpreted as a mitzvah to say it. Remembering it inside your head is too nebulous. In general, rabbinic interpretation of Torah likes mitzvot to be concrete things that you can do them on purpose. You can tell whether you've done them. Other people can tell whether you've done them. And emotions and thoughts are too nebulous for that. And in this case, there's also the added element of the wine. But the midrash then responds to itself, Einli ela bayom, balayla minayin. And says, but I only know that you're supposed to do it during the day because it says, remember the day of Shabbat. How do I know that you're supposed to also make Kiddush at night? Talmud Lomar, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat L'Kodsho. So we're supposed to learn it from the words, remember the day of Shabbat to sanctify it. Now, I put in a note in the English following Rashi, remember it as it's becoming sanctified. Maybe, but the Gemara is about to not understand this, so it's also possible that it's just incoherent. The Gemara does not like the text of this midrash, and it responds, Balayla minayin adarabba. It says, the midrash says, how do I know that I'm supposed to make Kiddush at night? Wait a minute, that's backwards. Ikar Kiddusha Balaylahu Kaddish. The primary Kiddush is at night. Because when you say Kiddush, if you're going to sanctify something, then it makes sense to sanctify it as its beginning. There's not a lot of point in saying, oh yeah, by the way, 18 hours ago, something started becoming holy. Noting the thing the change when it happens, that seems meaningful. Vitu, and additionally, balayla minayin tamud lomar zachor et yom. The midrash says, how do I know that it's at night? Well, I can learn that from the fact that it says day. That just seems backwards. Tana mihadar alayla v'kanasev le kra diyama. The Breita begins by looking for a source for night, and then it quotes something about daytime. So how does that help? Okay, so now we're going to rewrite our midrash. Hachikara. This is what it should say. Zachor Yom HaShabbat l'kodsho. Remember the day of Shabbat to sanctify it. Zochrehu al hayayin b'knisato. Remember it over wine as it enters. Ein li ella balayla. But if I am mentioning it as it begins, then that's just nighttime. Bayom minayin. How do I know that I'm also supposed to go back and say Kiddush again the next day? Talmud lomar zachor Yom HaShabbat. That's why it says, remember the day of Shabbat. Now, you may remember that last week, and maybe the week before as well, I made a fuss about how the Kiddush Friday night is Deoraita, it's from the Torah, and Kiddush Shabbat day is not. This appears to be a midrash which is deriving a daytime Kiddush on Shabbat from a pasuk in the Torah. So either that does not agree with the position that we were working in last week, or it's what's called an asmachta. It's just an attachment of a rabbinic law to a pasuk, which would be either for mnemonic purposes or to indicate that it's, connected to Torah, even if it doesn't come from Torah. I don't know which one this is, but either way, it does seem to be a tension between this text and the text we saw last week, in which the Shabbat day Kiddush was not even being called Kiddush. Where here we are definitely calling it Kiddush. Okay. Now the Gemara wants to know, okay, granting that there's this thing we're supposed to say on Shabbat, what is it? Bayom mai mevarich. Okay, during the daytime, what bracha does he make? Amar Rav Yehuda, borei pri hagafen. Rav Yehuda says, you say borei pri hagafen, meaning you just make a blessing on the wine itself. There's no need to say anything else. And this is, from a strictly legal perspective, more or less what we do. We tend to recite some psukim from Tanakh, usually from Torah, before the Borei Pri Hagafen on Shabbat or Yom Tov during the day. But they're not strictly necessary, and they're definitely not a bracha or something that would have a halachic significance. It's just to connect, to sort of announce that the action you're doing is connected to Shabbat. It doesn't have legal significance. If you left it out, it wouldn't make any difference legally. Okay, so now we have a story about Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi iklo Mechoza. Rav Ashi went to visit in Mechoza. Amrule liktish lan mar kiddusha rabba. They said, would the master please make kiddusha rabba for us, the great kiddush? Now that's a term that is relatively widespread, although I would say a little bit more in the Sephardi world than the Ashkenazi world in my experience in our time, and it certainly means Shabbat day Kiddush, but it would seem that the term was not familiar to Rav Ashi, so either it was a regional thing or it was a relatively new term in his time. I don't know which. Either way, he doesn't know what it means. Havule, and they handed him a cup of wine. And he's thinking to himself, Savar, hu Kiddusha Rabbah. He's thinking, oh, wait a minute, what is Kiddusha Rabbah? I don't know what they're expecting me to do, but they handed me a cup of wine. So Amar, he said to himself, Michti, kol brachot kulan, borei pri hagafen ami bereisha. Well, usually when we make a bracha that is connected to a cup of wine, we make a borei pri hagafen first. Now, this is actually not true of kol ha-brachot kulan, of all brachot. Notice, for example, if they had asked him to bench, borei pri hagafen would be at the end. But okay, he's guessing based on on what usually happens, that when you're handed a cup of wine, the first thing you do is to make a Borei Pri Hagafen. Amar Borei Pri Hagafen, the Agidbe. He said Borei Pri Hagafen and kind of like said the Hagafen really slowly to see what would happen next. And he saw an old man who was bending over to drink. And it's at that moment that he figured out that he wasn't expected to say anything else. Up until then, he's, I guess, faking it until he makes it, playing along, hoping to figure out what to do next as he goes. And he doesn't know that he's actually done the right thing and finished until he actually sees the guy bend over to drink. And at that point, Karya Nafshe, he says about himself, a pasuk in Kohelet, Hechacham enav berosho. A wise person has eyes in his head, meaning that it's a good idea to be aware of what's going on around you. And he managed to fake it, and nobody noticed because he was able to be conscious of what other people were doing and responsive to them quickly. I would not recommend this method. I strongly recommend that if somebody asks you to do something you don't know what it is, that you say, "Excuse me," and then perhaps they'll tell you what you're supposed to do. But apparently that wasn't Rav Ashi's style. Amri b'nei Rabbi Chia. So the sons of Rabbi Chia said, "Misha lo hivdil b'motzei Shabbat, mavdil v'holech kol Shabbat kula." They said anybody who didn't make Havdalah Saturday night can make Havdalah all week. Now, we've seen this quote several times already in this chapter, and we've been assuming until now that all week actually just meant all week. And I'm sorry, we've been assuming that all week meant until the following Shabbat. But the fact is that you can draw the marker for when the week ends in a number of different places, and the Gemara now wants to know the ad kama. What does that mean? For how long can you actually make Havdalah? Amar Rabbi Zera ad Revi'i b'Shabbat. Rabbi Zera said until Wednesday. Right. So this still this in this sense, weeks go from Wednesday to Tuesday, with a Shabbat in the middle, and you have the I'm getting ready for Shabbat, I'm getting ready for Shabbat, I'm getting ready for Shabbat for 3 days. Then you have Shabbat. Then you have, oh, that was a lovely Shabbat. That was a lovely Shabbat. And that goes on for 3 days. And then you switch back to, oh, got to get ready for next Shabbat. Right? And so the week actually has Shabbat at its center in Rabbi Zera's description rather than at its end. Ki hadiyativ Rabbi Zera kamed Rav Asi. So then Rabbi Zera is sitting in front of Rav Asi. The Amri la Rav Zera kamed Rabbi Yochanan, or maybe it was Rav Asi sitting in front of Rabbi Yochanan. The record is apparently unclear who was sitting there. V'yati v'kamar, and as he was sitting there, he said the following: L'inyan gittin chada b'shabta trei v'tzlata batar shabta arba v'chamisha mali shabta kame shabta. So he said to himself, for the purposes of divorce, and we'll get to what this means in a second, but for the purposes of divorce, the first of the week and the second of the week and the third of the week, that's Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday in English, those are Batar Shabta, those are after Shabbat. Arba v'chamsha umale Shabta, so the fourth and the fifth and Erev Shabbat, that's Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, are Kame Shabta, those are before Shabbat. So the same idea that we just said about Havdalah, except now about a divorce case instead. It would seem that it was possible to, not that this would be a nice thing to do or an appropriate thing to do, but it would seem it was possible to give a divorce conditionally so that the wife will only be divorced if something happens at a particular time. But you have to set a specific time at which something happens. So if you say you're divorced if whatever it is happens, or you do whatever it is before Shabbat, that before Shabbat is defined as this Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And if you say after Shabbat, that's defined as this Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Sorry, it's Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. So the same conception of the week, but just put into a legalistic court protocol issue about conditions on divorce. Okay, so we're done now with that. It would seem, by the way, that what we just read interprets the statement we've had all along about making Havdalah late as really only meaning until Tuesday afternoon, and that, quote, all week, unquote, never meant all week. It just meant until you're done with this Shabbat, or until the end of the week, but with the week defined as from Wednesday to Tuesday. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi said, Aval lo al ha'or. But he says, but if you're making Havdalah after Saturday night, you don't make a Borei Meorei Ha'esh. There's no bracha on the light. Presumably because once the sun comes up Sunday morning, you don't have need any more of extra light. It's that part of the end of Shabbat is kind of gone. The part where you recognize that Shabbat is over by lighting fires. Amar Rav Brona Amar Rav Hanotel Yadav Lo Yikadesh. Now we move on to a related but separate issue, which is reminiscent to some of the issues we did last week. Rav Brona said in the name of Rav that once you've washed your hands, you can't make kiddush, which seems to put you stuck in an in-between state in which you can't eat until you make hamotzi. You can't make hamotzi until you fulfill the mitzvah of kiddush, but you can't fulfill the mitzvah of kiddush for yourself. So you're sort of stuck waiting for somebody else to make kiddush for you, so that then you can make hamotzi, so that then you can go on with your meal. Okay, don't worry, we're going to reject that because that's very intricate. Amar lahu Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta. So Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta responded, Akati lo nach nafshe de Rav shachachinhu lishmatete? He said, wait a minute, Rav's not even dead yet. Or according to one interpretation I saw, Rav's only just barely dead. You have to add some words in order to make that work, but I don't know what the idiom meant. And you were already forgetting all of his Torah. Okay, so apparently this idea that if you wash, you can't make kiddush afterwards is contradictory to a teaching of Rav. Mindy, were you saying something?
I was just going to ask what teaching in particular are we referring to here?
We'll get to it in a second.
Okay.
Right now, in fact. Zimnin Sagin Hava Kaimna Kameda Rav. So Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta is continuing to talk, and he says, many times I stood in front of Rav, presumably on Shabbat at a meal. Zimnin de Chaviva ale Rifta. Sometimes he preferred bread, and he was, more hungry than thirsty. Mekadesh Rifta, and then he would make kiddush on the bread. Zimdin de Chaviva le Chamra. But other times he preferred wine. Presumably on those occasions he was more thirsty than he was hungry. Mekadesh Chamra, and then he would make kiddush on wine. So it seems like what Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta is saying is that you can just rearrange the order of your meal. If you can make kiddush on bread, that does presumably mean that you're washing and then making kiddush right afterwards. So to suggest that order is not possible would be insulting to the memory of the either recently deceased or almost deceased Rav. So, and in fact, this there are communities, most notably, I believe, the community from Germany, that always wash before they make kiddush in order to not have the disruption of having everybody stand up and go in the kitchen and come back again right after kiddush, which is not perceived as all that dignified. So that aspect of this seems certainly has come down to us. People making kiddush on bread, even though they have wine, that I believe is not usually considered to be standard practice. Okay. Amar of Humana Amarav. So now we are getting back to something very closely related to what we did last week. Ta'am Eino Mekadesh. If you ate already, you can't make Kiddush. The suggestion here would be that if you ate after Shabbat started, you have lost your opportunity to make Kiddush. It's too late. So, don't worry, we're going to get to an extensive machloket about this, but we need to get there. Ba mine Rav Chana bar, I would have said Chinana. They seem to have pointed at Chinana. I'm going to say Chinana. Rav Chana bar Chinana me Rav Huna tam mahu sheyavdil. The Rav Chana bar Chinana asked Rav Huna, well, okay, I can't make Kiddush if I ate already, but can I make Havdalah if I ate already? Amar le, ani omer ta'am mavdil. I say that if you ate, then you can make Havdalah. Rav Asi amar ta'am eno mavdil. But Rav Asi says if you ate, you can't make Havdalah. Okay, so now it's time to have a story in Rav Asi's house about whether or not you can make Havdalah right after eating. It's all about the stories tonight. Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba ikla lebe Rav Asi. So Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba was visiting Rav Asi, and Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba seems to be a student of Rav Huna. And ish delei v'tayimidi. Rav Yirmiyah, when Shabbat ended, and he forgot that he hadn't made Kiddush yet, and by mistake he ate something before Kiddush. But then havule kasa va'avdil. They brought him the cup, and he made Havdalah. So, Amra le debitu, Rav Asi's wife said to Rav Asi, "V'hamarlo avid hachi." She said, "But you don't do that." And she knows the practice in her own household, and she knows that in Rav Asi's house, if you ate already, you don't make Havdalah afterwards. Amar la, he said to her, "Shavke, leave him alone." Kirabe spherele. He's just agreeing with his own teacher. Which there's a lesson about tolerance of other legal positions, even inside your own house, even when you're the authority associated with the position that's being ignored, to be learned here. Rav Asi doesn't seem to mind particularly, and he does ask his wife to leave the guy alone. Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Shmuel. So Rav Yosef said the name of Shmuel, Ta'am Eino Mekadesh, Ta'am Eino Mavdil. Rav Yosef in the name of Shmuel said, if you ate, you can't make Kiddush or make Havdalah, which seems to be the position that Rav Asi was also asserting. But Rabba Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, but Rabba said the name of Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel. So it's the same Shmuel, but the first one was Rav Yosef in the name of Shmuel. The second one is Rabba quoting Rav Nachman quoting Shmuel. And this time we quote Shmuel as saying, if he ate, he does make Kiddush, and if he ate, he does make Havdalah. It's exactly the opposite position. So we don't actually know what Shmuel said. Amar Rava, Hilchata ta'am mikadesh v'ta'am mavdil. Rava says the law is, and Rava's going to go on for a while, which is why I indented it here. The whole indented bit is him. The law is that even if you ate already, you still make Kiddush, and even if you ate already, you still make Havdalah. And if you did not make Kiddush yet, you can continue to have an opportunity to make Kiddush all the way until Shabbat ends. Just a couple of days ago, I ran into somebody on the street when I was out for a walk, and he said to me, the last time Purim was on a Friday, I didn't have children yet, and I didn't wake up from my Purim Suda until 3:00 in the afternoon on Shabbat, and that's when I made Kiddush. I am not endorsing this behavior, but apparently it is occasionally a thing. So this is still Rava talking. He says, and the third thing that he says is the halacha is that anybody who didn't make Havdalah Saturday night can continue to make Havdalah all week, which presumably we're still interpreting to mean until Tuesday night. Except that just as we just had a dispute about what Shmuel really said, now we have a dispute about what Rava said. Ameimar patach lo laha shmata de Rava b'hai lishna. So Ameimar started teaching Rava's quote as follows. Instead of the way we had just quoted it, Ameimar quoted it this way. Amar Rava, hilchata ta'am mikadesh ta'am mavdil. So this line is the same as the last one. The law is that if you ate, you can still make kiddush. If you ate, you can still make havdalah. The next line is the same also. Mishalo kidesh be'erev Shabbat mikadesh v'holech kol hayom kulo. Somebody who didn't make kiddush on Friday night should still make kiddush all day, although it's not actually exactly the same, because the last version that we had was kol hayom kulo ad motzei Shabbat, all the way until Shabbat ends. This just says all day. So maybe Ameimar is setting an earlier deadline, or maybe it's incidental. It's hard to say. But this next line is definitely different, though. Misha lo hivdil b'motzei Shabbat, somebody who did not make havdalah after Shabbat, mavdil v'holech kol hayom kulo, can make havdalah all day. So in Ameimar's quote of Rava, it would seem that the law for havdalah is parallel to the way the law for kiddush works, that there's a particular night on which you're supposed to say either one, and if you didn't, then you can say it all the way until the following evening, but not beyond that. So in this version of Ameimar, it would seem that havdalah is associated specifically with Sunday. You're supposed to say it Saturday night, which is the beginning of Sunday. If you didn't, you have the rest of Sunday. Whereas in the first version of Rava that we quoted, and all of the other versions, in fact, of this statement about havdalah that we've quoted up until now, it would seem that it's just associated with Shabbat being over. And Shabbat continues to be over until you start looking forward to the next Shabbat again. And that would go until Tuesday evening. Okay, we do not resolve that. Amrile Mar Yanuka Umar Kashisha Breder of Chisda of Ashi. So we have two people, both of whom are sons of Rav Chisda, and they are known as Mar Yanuka, the young master, the child master, and Mar Kashisha, and the old master. Both of them sons of Rav Chisda. They said to Rav Ashi, Zim nachada ikla ameimar la'atrin v'lo havalan chama. It happened once that Ameimar was visiting our place. Possibly he was their guest. Possibly he was just in their town. I don't know. And they did not have wine. It sounds like wherever it is that they lived, wine was not routinely available, as we will see coming along. And in fact, it seems, based on a little bit of very shallow research that I did, that in Babylonia, in the time of the Gemara, the crop that was most successful in Babylonia at the time was dates, not grapes. So date beer seems to have been the thing. In any case, they didn't have one. So Aitena Shichra, we brought him beer, and Shichra probably is, by the way, date beer. We will get into the different kinds of beer next week, but this is probably beer made from dates, not from barley. Velo avdil uvat tavat, and we brought him beer, and he refused to make havdalah. He didn't make havdalah, and he spent the night fasting. Lemachar tirachna v'aitena lechamra. The next day, we put in a lot of effort, and we succeeded in finding him wine and bringing it to him. The avdil v'tayimidi, and at that point, he made havdalah and he ate something. So it seems like Rav Ashi, not only did he refuse to make havdalah on beer as opposed to wine, but he also refused to eat until he had succeeded in making havdalah, which I suppose is what motivated these hosts to figure out how to find him wine so that he would stop fasting. Somewhat surprisingly, Rav Ashi comes back to visit again a year later. L'shana tu ikla ala atrin. A year later, again, he came to visit us. Lo havalan chamra. We didn't have wine. Aitena shechra. So we brought beer. Amar, he said, Ihachi chamar medinahu. This must be what passes for wine here. Right? This must be the wine of this country. Avdel v'taimidi. So he made havdalah and he ate something. Shema minatzlat. So from this you can learn three things, and this is sort of like the conclusion that we had. I think it was last week. It might have been the week before last. We're going to learn from this story of Rav Ashi three things. Shema mina hamavdil b'tfilat tzarich sheyavdil hakos. The first thing you're going to learn is that even if you had said havdalah in the Amidah, you still need to say havdalah on a cup, because if it weren't necessary to make havdalah on a cup, Rav Ashi would presumably not have needed to stage this hunger strike to get himself wine, because I think we're assuming that he said Mariv, or at least that he, I think we're assuming it would be conventional for him to say Mariv. So it must be that there's no way out of his dilemma other than making havdalah on a cup. Ushmamina asur lo le'adam sheyochal kodem she'avdil. And we also learn from it that you're not allowed to eat before you make havdalah. Apparently that's not just that night. It extends all the way until presumably Tuesday evening. It presumably does not extend forever. Ushmamina mishalo hivdil b'motzei Shabbat mavdil v'holech kol Shabbat kulo. And we can also learn from it that anybody who didn't make havdalah motzei Shabbat can continue to make havdalah all week, which again we're probably still interpreting as meaning until Tuesday evening. This last Shema Mina is a little bit difficult to support because the position of Amemar himself, right? This is Amemar here, is it not? Is refusing to make havdalah. Yeah, this is Amemar, and Amemar himself, his own personal position was that you could make havdalah all of Sunday, but not beyond Sunday. It sounds like he made havdalah on Sunday, so it's not entirely clear why the Gemara is concluding that his behavior making havdalah on Sunday proves that you can make havdalah until Tuesday, when that does not seem to have been his position anyway. I don't have an answer to that one, so I'm just going to note that it's mysterious that the Gemara thinks it's learning it. Okay, so let's just spend 2 minutes reviewing what we did, and then we'll be done and take questions. All right, we began with rewriting a midrash, which the Gemara was not satisfied was properly using the word day, so that in the end the midrash was deriving the need to make havdalah from the idea of declaring Shabbat sanctified as soon as Shabbat becomes holy, and then adding daytime as an afterthought, which we noted may or may not contradict our Gemara from last week that indicated, as in fact is the halacha, that the kiddush of Shabbat day is not from the Torah. We decided that the only thing you have to say at kiddush and Shabbat day is Borei Pri Hagafen, and we had a funny story about Rav Ashi not knowing exactly what was expected of him and faking it until he figured it out. Then we have Rabbi Zera interpreting the idea of making havdalah late as being until Tuesday on the theory that the week is actually 3 days before Shabbat, preparing for Shabbat, and then 3 days after Shabbat, recovering from Shabbat, cleaning up from Shabbat, being after Shabbat, and whatever that means, so that Shabbat is not the week end so much as it is the week middle. It's the heart of the week. And then we spoke about whether maybe you can't wash first and then make kiddush. We rejected that because apparently Rav used to like to make kiddush on bread instead of on wine. And then we got to our can you eat after Havdalah or not. We had about even sides one way or the other about that, except that, and we even had one story each on either side. We had one story about somebody making Havdalah even though they had eaten, and another story about somebody who refuses to make Havdalah because he doesn't have wine and doesn't eat until Sunday. And then we finally came to our last new idea of the evening, which was Chamar Medina, or as it is often called, Chamra de Medina, which is the wine of your local place, which is not necessarily wine at all. In this case, it would appear that the normal alcoholic beverage of the location was date beer. It could be something else depending on what people drink in a particular location. It seems to be about what fills the social role of wine in your particular time and place. And my impression is that in the 21st century in the Western world, at least some rabbis are also inclined to say that things that are not alcoholic can also be Chamra Medina because they are fulfilling that social role as the main social drink. I have heard it said about Coca-Cola, maybe, I don't know. I've heard it said about orange juice. Certainly many people say it about whiskey. It's the social role of wine itself in our world is a little bit attenuated from what it used to be, so it's a little hard to know exactly what we're looking for in this regard. All right, are there questions?
Yes. I was expecting the first thing, when the Gemara says that there are Shmami Natlat, so 3 things that we learn from here. I was expecting the first one to be that of Chamar Medina, that if you don't have wine, you can make Havdalah on whatever is the socially acceptable beverage in the place in which you live. And it wasn't. And I was like, what?
That is a good point. I wonder if that means that was not controversial.
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
What about making Havdalah during Shmoneh Esrei? That's not controversial.
Well, making Havdalah during Shemona Esrei is certainly not controversial.
No,
but the fact that you still need to make Havdalah again after you make Havdalah in Shemona Esrei, I can't say for sure that it's controversial, but the Gemara makes a fuss out of it in multiple places. I think we've already seen it twice, and it's also, there's a significant sugya about it in Brachot, leading me to believe that somebody thought it needed to be proved. So maybe controversial isn't the right word, but I think that these kinds of shmaminas are about things that might otherwise have been up for debate. And it may be that everybody understood that there were times and places where there was no, you may do with whatever everybody locally used instead.
I see.
That may have been something everybody accepted. I'm just guessing though.
Okay. Another question is, right at the beginning, we had a Tanu Rabbanan, and you translated it, or you not translated it, but you said, what did you say? A midrash. You called it a midrash, but are Braitot and midrashim synonymous?
No. So midrash is more of a genre, and Braita is more of a reference to Tana is more of a reference to a time period. There are certainly midrashim that are not Tannaitic, that are later than that. And probably, if my teacher, Professor Kugel, is correct, many midrashim that are much, much older than that as well. But this is both a midrash and a Braita. It is a Braita telling us a midrash.
But how do you know that? Tanu Rabbanan means it's a Braita. What indicated it being a Midrash?
That it quotes a pasuk and then interprets it. And that by itself would probably be enough to say whatever comes next is almost by definition a midrash, but in this time period. But there's also a lot of vocabulary that's associated with midrash, asking for where a pasuk is with the word minayin, and then introducing the words that you learn something from in the pasuk with the words tilmod lomar or talmud lomar, depending on how you wish to pronounce them. It's the same words either way. Those are sort of midrashic terminology.
Yeah, that's true.
In the same way as a month from now, when we sit down to the Seder, there's a lot of material in the Haggadah that I would describe as midrash, but there's
Yeah.
also a lot of material that I would not describe that way. And those two things that I just said, the fact that you quote psukim and interpret them, and the fact that you use key words that the midrashic genre uses to describe the interpretation of text, those are the two things that I would say mark a midrash.
Okay. Okay. And also when we just a few lines down, Hachi Kamar Zacharet Yom HaShabbat L'Kadsho, we're saying, what they're saying basically is that L'Kadsho refers to Friday night Kiddush, but the fact that it says Yom HaShabbat makes it a reference to Shabbat day. So it's
sort
all
of
one.
I think what they're saying is that the whole thing, Zachor Yom HaShabbat L'Kadsho, which we're going to read according to them as meaning something like, remember the day of Shabbat as it becomes holy, or to remember it to accompany its sanctification. That sentence describes saying Kiddush at the beginning of Shabbat. And then they're saying, well, how do I know that I'm also supposed to do this during Shabbat? Well, I know that because it didn't really need to use the word Yom. It could have just said HaShabbat. The word Yom is kind of extra, so it's there to tell me that Yom, the day of Shabbat, isn't the wrong time to sanctify Shabbat. What I just said is slightly more interpretation than the Midrash actually quoted, but I think that's what's happening here.
Because otherwise, if you're interpreting that segment of the pasuk with the idea that Yom is redundant, then L'Kadsho could just be referring to the daytime Kiddush.
Well, I think they seem to be working on the assumption that L'Kadsho means that you're making Kiddush either accompanies the day becoming holy, or you're making Kiddush actually makes the day holy, but at the beginning of, in that case, it needs to be at the beginning so that it can, that's where it belongs.
Yeah, and then the question is, why didn't they consider Kiddush during the day as like as a bracha levatala almost?
So you'll notice that in the event that you made Kiddush Friday night and that your Kiddush Shabbat day is just a Shabbat day Kiddush, all it consists of, from a strictly legal perspective, is a borei pri hagafen. As long as you're drinking wine, there's no reason not to make a borei pri hagafen anyway.
Right.
So really, all that the Shabbat day Kiddush does is say you should be a mensch and eat a formal meal with wine at the beginning for Shabbat lunch. It's not really Kiddush in that sense. Unless you didn't say Kiddush Friday night, in which case there's an actual bracha of Kiddush that you're going to say, but that's okay because it's the one that you missed yesterday.
Right. Uh-huh. Okay.
Okay. Okay, anybody else?
So really, we're just, sorry, we're just making kiddush during the day, or we're just making a borei pri hagafen during the day. Because it says Zachor et Yom HaShabbat. So it's some way to acknowledge the day of Shabbat.
Yes. And possibly also to mark the eating of a meal that is itself a mitzvah. Although I'm a little bit reluctant to say that because the same could be said for Sudah Shlishit, and we don't seem to be requiring wine there.
Right. Right. And that's an assumption here because we haven't really mentioned at all the requirement to have 2 or 3 Sudot.
That's
So,
true. We will eventually mention it, I think.
yeah.
Certainly it is elsewhere. I think we mentioned it here also. And we did mention, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks ago, the need to eat if you're making kiddush.
Yes.
So the need for lunch is kind of hovering in the background here, even if
Right.
it's not, being mentioned explicitly.
Right. It certainly is implicit. And it almost seems to be saying, have wine with the meal that you are required to have, and therefore make it a real Shabbat thing, meal with what we will call in quotations a kiddush.
Yeah. And I think that there's a almost a self-conscious meditation here on what does it take to turn a day into Shabbat, and what do we want Shabbat to look like, and then we tell everybody to do that. And
Yeah.
like Shabbat as we know it didn't just happen. It was manufactured on purpose and with great care by people trying to make it special.
Right.
Um,
Right. And it helps to keep that in mind, that is essentially what's going on.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So I will see you all next week when we will finally, it being by then just after Purim, we will make it to a discussion of Erev Pesach. And I hope we will actually get to a discussion at this Seder before Pesach. I did not plan the number of pages that it would take to get there very well. For that, I apologize. In any case, good
That's
night,
okay.
everybody. It was really good
That's
to see
okay.
you.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.